Good afternoon, everyone. Hope things are well and hope you are well. In terms of us, Newcastle United, we are most certainly well, and at this stage, currently in our Premier League season, we are exactly where we want to be. We're just outside the top four. We are 100% where we want to be in the Carabao Cup. Newcastle have full control going back to St James's Park, and in my opinion, we should be going to Wembley from this point. It would be a bottle from us if we weren't to go to Wembley from this stage. We have the control. Arsenal will have hard fixtures before that second leg. Newcastle, even if they lose at St James's Park, they just got to make sure we keep a hold of that 2-goal lead. But, our big factors going into that game. When it comes to transfer news, players going out and players going in will heavily dictate how Newcastle will do, not just in that game, but in every game coming up. I want to start, of course, with the Martin Dubravka situation, because that is the big talking point. Our current first choice goalkeeper, who's had, to be fair to him, an amazing spree of games. I know Newcastle have been quality as a team. Dubravka hasn't had to do too much, but you can't deny Newcastle is a far more comfortable team to watch and a far more comfortable team to play the ball around when Dubravka's in goal over Nick Pope. Which tells us two things. Tells us that the 36-year-old Martin Dubravka should be staying at Newcastle United, and it also tells us that we probably do need a new first-choice goalkeeper, because the fact that I'm favouring a 36-year-old over Nick Pope probably says a lot about Nick Pope's distribution. It's just bad. It's just bad distribution. So that we'll get to that problem, I feel like, towards the summertime. But in terms of now, Newcastle United, it's probably just about keeping the hold of Martin Dubravka, unless the money offered is too great to keep a hold of him. But we'll start with reports coming out yesterday, because now the U-turn has already started to go into Newcastle's favour. We've had some reports from Saudi Arabia claiming that the deal is completely off to Al-Shabab. Again, take that with a pinch of salt. I wouldn't look too much into that one. But the reason why I mentioned that is because, well, when you look at Eddie Howe's press conference today and the comments he's made towards Martin Dubravka, it does raise a few eyebrows, because if you look at what Eddie Howe said today, he's been adamant about keeping Dubravka at this football club. He said that Dubravka doesn't want to go at all. I think Eddie Howe's comments were quite fair. He looked at the player's situation and go, well, we're going to try our best to keep him at Newcastle, but maybe things aren't going to go well. But the point being is that there's still an active talk. So what Eddie Howe has said in the press conference today is that Dubravka hasn't fully left the football club. Dubravka hasn't fully decided to stay. It's just a current situation where the manager is still talking to the player. And he has been quite transparent in the press conference and just described what the current situation is. And in terms of what I personally believe and what I personally think, it's still a tricky one to say, actually, because a few days ago, before the Arsenal game, it looked absolutely bang on that he was going to leave after the Arsenal game. And then you watch the full-time whistle when Dubravka comes over by himself and claps the fans up by himself. In his mind, it 100% looks like a goodbye message. So at the time, Dubravka felt like that was his last game at the football club. But since that, we heard in the press conferences, we know that Newcastle United wants to keep him. But also weird, because after the Arsenal game, Eddie Howe came out in the post-match press conference and he was saying how he wasn't aware of the transfer activities for Gordon Dubravka, even though he's the manager of this football club, and obviously that's our first choice goalkeeper. So I don't know, again, if there's a bit of a Paul Mitchell and Eddie Howe, not a bashing of heads together, but I don't know if Newcastle have basically been sat on selling Dubravka in this window without actually fully being transparent with Eddie Howe about it. I don't know. That came across a bit weird in the Arsenal post-match press conference, but in terms of where we are now, Newcastle are trying to keep a hold of the goalkeeper. They are desperate to keep a hold of him, and it depends on the money that we would have got for him, but I could agree with everyone and say that Dubravka should at least be here until the end of this season. If we let him go at the end of the season on a free, ideally we don't want to do that. In my personal opinion, we probably should offer him a 1-year extension, and then if Newcastle want to sell him in the summer, we can get some money for him. I feel like that's probably our best interest, offer him a 1-year extension and then to sell him in the summer and actually get some money for him, if that's a feasible option. But again, what you get with Dubravka at the minute, you can't replace him, can you? I don't think we can replace him, and Newcastle should keep a hold of him. But yeah, I wanted to start off by talking about that first. But just before we get into the next bit of transfer news, of course, if you guys are new around here, get down there, hit that subscribe button, smash like button as well if you enjoy. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the article Craig Hope put out yesterday, completely stating that Arsenal cannot afford Alexander Isak this summer. They can't afford to buy him in. And that is, of course, stirred up the Arsenal fans a little bit. But looking in, as an outsider, looking into that transfer report, I probably do agree with it because you got to look at the players that Arsenal have actually spent. I mean, even in the summer they just had, they bought Mikel Merino, obviously our former player. They spent a good amount of money on him. They spent a good amount of money on Kagafoe. So they bought those two. And they're both on the bench against Newcastle. They didn't even bring them on against Newcastle. And then you look at the options that they had. Kai Havertz is terrible for, what was it, £70 million for Havertz. I mean, they've actually spent more money on Kai Havertz than we spent on Alexander Isak. If I remember correctly, I mean, how bad is that? Like, Kai Havertz is awful. I don't rate him at all. He's most certainly not at the levels of Alexander Isak in terms of this comparison. But yeah, he was bad. And Arsenal are obviously desperate for attacking players. They're not great in front of goal, and you've seen it against us in the first leg. They had a lot of chances, and they didn't take a single one of them. And so for them, striker, especially in the summer, is going to be a key priority for them. And Isak, currently, you have to say, is one of the best strikers in the world. He's just won Premier League Player of the Month today. That's the first one in his career. 100% deserved. And for Newcastle, he is without a doubt almost sellable asset in terms of how much you would get for him and how many teams would want him. And it's also the hardest player at Newcastle, I feel like, to replace. So Newcastle could not replace him in any capacity. And it is within our best interest to keep a hold of him. And you have to say for Newcastle as well, I think I wouldn't say we can easily keep a hold of him because it depends on where Newcastle finish. But you have to look at where Newcastle are now. We are heading towards a cup final. We are the favourites to go to a cup final. Whether we do it or not, of course, all depends on the game at St James's Park. But we are expected to get to a cup final. Newcastle are currently 5th in the table. And again, you've got to look at the fixtures we've got coming up. Bournemouth at home's our hardest league fixture in the next 4 or 5 games or so. And now, with all due respect to Bournemouth, we should be beating them at St James's Park. In every single match, you've got Southampton away, Wolves at home. I mean, these are matches that Newcastle should just win with ease. Like, without disrespecting these teams, they are the worst in the league. And Newcastle just have to go one step at a time, yes. But you've got to look at where we are now and whether an English spot opens up in the Champions League next season. So, if our English teams do well in European competition, 5th might actually be a Champions League spot. So we could potentially already be in the Champions League now. And if not, Europa League, Conference League. Newcastle will, in my opinion, have some form of European football going into next season. But again, the league table below us is tight. So we just got to get the results when it matters for us. And we've got to beat the teams around us. But if Newcastle can do that, then we're all going to get European football, or we could get Champions League football. And we are heading, as expected, to a cup final. So for a guy like Alexander Isak, there's no way a player like him's going to leave. I mean, where's he going to go and who can afford him? You got to ask yourselves that question. Who realistically can actually afford Alexander Isak that would want to bring him in? I mean, Bayern won't want him because they've got Kane. Real won't want him because they've got Mbappe. Like, I'm trying to think of actual top quality teams out there that could afford. I mean, maybe PSG could afford him, but why would you go there? Obviously, teams in the Premier League can afford him. Your Arsenal. I think Arsenal, again, is probably the only realistic team that could potentially bring him in because obviously they desperately need strikers. City aren't going to go for him. Who else is he's not going to go to Man U, so I think Arsenal's probably might be the only realistic team, and even then, like, would Isak jump from Newcastle to Arsenal? Because that jump, if you had said that a couple of years ago, the jump would have been like that, but the jump's not that big anymore. Obviously, Arsenal still are a much bigger club than Newcastle, and you probably would get more money there, but I mean, you got to look at where Arsenal are this season. They're not that much better off than Newcastle, and they are, as it stands, going out of the cup to Newcastle. So I wouldn't really say it's much of an upgrade anymore, to be honest, even though obviously Arsenal has historically won so many trophies. They just haven't in recent years. So for a guy like Isak, I just can't see why he would go there. I can't see why he would go there at the minute. I don't think he would. So yeah, I guess that was the bulk of what I want to talk about there. Obviously, the Isak situation with Arsenal, and then, of course, the Martin Dubravka situation. So at this moment in time, it's still players going out the door before you bring in. So at this stage, yeah, not the most exciting window in the world, I know, but I think once Newcastle finally realises what players they want to get rid of, then they can start bringing, and that's where we'll get to within the next week or so, I like to hope. But Dubravka currently is the priority. Let's keep him until the end of the season at least. Let's just make sure, even though Nick Pope's come back in a couple of weeks, let's make sure Nick Pope has to actually sit on the bench and wait to come back in. Let's actually give Martin Dubravka credit where credit is due. Let's keep him in goal until he makes mistakes. That's what we should be doing. Nick Pope can sit on the bench and just know that, you know what, when I do get my chance to come back in, I've got to be a lot better on distribution. I've got to be better on my shot stopping. He just has to know deep down that I've got to take my chance when I get it. And I feel like Newcastle will do well at that. But that's it in terms of this video. Let me know your thoughts down below. Take care. Video will be out tomorrow before, of course, a Bromley game on Sunday. So wish you all the best, and we'll see you all in the next one.